Hey everybody, it's Mishka. I figured I'd just make a little talking head video about InZoi because InZoi released in early access on March 28th. So it was only a couple days ago, really, not that long. I wanted to talk just about my thoughts and feelings on the game for a little bit. Specifically about queerness in InZoi. Or rather the lack thereof. First, a bit of background, I guess, about me. I've been a Sims player since the original Sims title. Back in 2000, I bought all of the expansion packs over time. I had all the expansion packs for the first game, all the expansion packs for the second game. I started to dwindle off on the third entry in the series simply because it just got too expensive. And also, I was getting a bit older and had other things to attend to, responsibilities, things like that. But I always came back to The Sims. And The Sims 4, while, we could sit here and talk about all of its many faults, it definitely has some good things to it as well. Now, I want to clarify that InZoi is just released in early access, and it's understandable that we don't have all of the features that you might find in The Sims, which has been around for the better part of a decade at this point. But when it comes to queerness, there is an interesting take on it in InZoi. So first of all, if you're not familiar with The Sims, by default, all Sims are kind of bisexual. They're open to romantic interactions from both males and females. And more recently, The Sims has also added gender non-binary status for Sims, meaning that they don't identify with male or female. You can actually make a Sim with a male frame, but have them be female and vice versa. This allows for creating trans characters. This allows for creating non-binary characters, and really allows for a lot of freedom in the imagination of, playing the game, playing a life simulation. InZoi, on the other hand, and I've seen many videos thus far, one from Malcolm, one from Satch, who I follow, and I love you, so please don't take this as a read or anything. It's not. But a lot of queer creators, or at least queer adjacent creators, have recognized that InZoi is a little bit lacking when it comes to not just gender, but also orientation and things like that. So I went through and I've been playing the game on GeForce Now because I'm a Mac person. And if you can afford it, I highly recommend playing the game with GeForce Now. You do need to have the highest available premium tier in order to play it. They've added a restriction. I would assume that's because the game is so intensive on their machines, on the computers they use, that you kind of need to pay for the higher tier in order to play the game. I've also noticed that when you're playing on GeForce Now, it allows you to open, say, a web browser to look at help and things like that. This is a function that previously was not available in GeForce Now. They really locked it down. You couldn't really even install mods. For example, I also bought City Skylines 2 when it launched into early access and then launched properly. And they have built in a mod section now where you can go and browse the mods, kind of like Nexus mods or kind of like CurseForge, but it's built into the game. So naturally, you would assume that you'd be able to just select any mod you want and install it. But with GeForce Now, they really restrict the amount of disk space that you can use, so hard drive space, and also connections to the outside world via the internet. They really locked that down. You weren't able to install mods, the game would crash and it would be done. Perhaps they've changed that now, but I'm not sure. So anyways, InZoi, you can create a gay character, but you have to define that gender preference in the creation of the Zoi, in the gender preferences. There's a small edit button that you can go in and edit in a drop-down menu kind of thing. But by default, all Zois in the world that you load into are straight. They're programmed to take romantic interactions from the opposite sex more positively, and in my experience, they always failed. I created a gay character, I ran around the city, I talked to all of the NPCs that I could, and anytime I tried to use a romantic action on a male Zoi while also playing as a male Zoi, it always failed. Without question, failed. And so this suggests, like many other creators have talked about, that the game is programmed to have straight relationships be the default, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, it would have been nice if, like, say, a percentage, like 1 in every 5 Zois was open to exploring romantic interactions with the same gender. But thus far, that's not the case. It's unfortunate, but you do have to create basically a set 2 different Zois and adjust their gender preferences manually. And once you create a Zoi, you can't go in and adjust that after the fact. So it would be really nice if they could update the create a Zoi so that if, you know, you forgot to put those preferences into the gender, that you could just go, you know, using a mirror or using a dresser, you could go in and make changes to your Zoi, and that was something that you could change. But at the same time, I'm not pressed about it, you know, because it's something that you can create in the game, but you just really have to manually do it yourself. The next thing I noticed is that, you know, so I made 2 Zois, I moved them into different lots, but I set the preferences so that they were both interested in men. And for some reason, I think this is a problem with the AI in the game, the like autonomy of the game. I took my one Zoi over to my other Zoi's house, and, you know, you can't go into someone's house unless you've met them. So I wasn't able to enter, and so I wasn't able to interact with the other Zoi because the other Zoi was stuck inside their house. They would only do actions that maintained their needs, and they would only do things within the area. He would not come outside. Luckily, with InZoi, you can actually click on another Zoi, and the, you know, interaction menu will pop up, and there's a little play button off to the left side of the menu. If you click on that, you can actually switch direct control to that Zoi. So I was able to switch control to the Zoi who was stuck in his house and make him come outside to meet my other Zoi. It was a process, but I got there. And I would say that a lot of this is chalked up to I'm still learning the game mechanics and how the game works. And also the UI, while it's beautiful, it is a bit confusing. It is. It really is. So, you know, also like the translations, they're not quite finished yet. Another thing that I found was like on the Zoi where I went and met all of the people in town trying to like find another gay Zoi, I instead established relationships, friendships, or professional relationships with all of these other Zois. And I started getting text messages from them in-game. And these text messages were extremely earnest and almost unrealistic to a degree. Like, I talked to this one Zoi like once or twice with 2 interactions or something. They shot me down. I moved on. But then they'll text me and say like, hey, I really appreciate having a friend like you in my life. Like, oh, you make my day brighter every day, every time I see you, kind of thing. Those are not unrealistic messages in the sense that, like, yes, somebody may send that to someone who they deeply care about. But in the context of we only spoke twice and now you're sending me these messages, it was a little bit weird. It was a little bit weird, okay? So, yeah, I don't know, that's the thing that I think that they'll have to improve over time. I don't think that it's fair for the LGBT community to attack the developers on this particular issue. It's something that if we make enough noise, they will change. I mean, they've already shown that they're willing to take consumer feedback into account. Like, they got rid of Denuvo, for example, which was an anti-piracy software that lives in the game and is known to slow down performance, especially on, you know, lower end machines. So the fact that they removed that shows us that they are listening. They are. It's just a matter of, you know, how quickly are they going to enable these things? One thing that I found once my Zois did meet and did start having romantic interactions, I realized that, okay, the next step is that I'd love for them to have a kid, right? Now, I wasn't expecting them to try and, you know, go too deep on pregnancy for trans Zois or for non-female Zois. I feel like, you know, establishing that and making it function properly was probably more important. But I realized that, okay, if I can't have a baby through, you know, sex, or setting the mood, as they call it. It's one of those things where I was like, surely I can adopt, right? Like that seems like the next step. Could not, for the life of me, figure out how to do this. And so I ended up having to go to the internet and research it. And sure enough, there's no adoption system in the game. They do have a roadmap out, and they're supposed to be releasing updates in May, which is really only about a month away, that address an adoption system. So it's not a matter of this is not available for queer Zois, it's a matter of it's not available for any Zoi at the moment. So again, I don't think it's really fair for us to be upset about that. It's a little annoying, but also they launched the game in early access and fully told us that there were things that were going to be missing. So from a consumer perspective, like, yeah, that's a bit of a bummer, but also like in a month that'll be different and we won't have to think about it anymore or care about it. So I feel like if it's in the plan, that's something that we can appreciate and be grateful for. Now, I've not made one of these talking videos before, but like, I know I've seen the comment section on the other videos that I watch from creators who talk about these issues, and I'm not being a shill for anyone here. I spent my own personal money on InZoi, I spent my own personal money on Sims and all of the crazy expansions that they have that don't fucking work. So like, yeah, we can be mad about that. But at the same time, like, we knew what we were getting into with InZoi. They told us straight up. They had many Discord chats and live stream events where they were answering questions. So like, we kind of had an idea what we were walking into. Along with that, the creators that were part of the early access network, they made videos talking about these issues. So again, like, I don't think it's really fair for us to be that expectant that these features were available at early access launch. If, you know, in 6 months from now, in a year from now, we're still kind of having these struggles when it comes to orientation and gender within our Zois, I feel like maybe that's a time that we could be upset about it. Like, you know, like it's not unreasonable for it not to launch with these features, but queer people have existed for just as long as humanity. We've been there, you know, as much as we've been erased over the years and throughout history, queer people have existed since the beginning of humanity. It's a thing. That's how it is. So obviously we want them to have that representation in there. Now, I still wanted a kid. So the easiest way to do that is simply to go into and edit the families. And you can actually add a Zoi to an existing family. So I ended up adding a child Zoi that I was able to set as the child of my other Zois. And it actually did say that they were, you know, father-son kind of situation or father-daughter. However, when I went back into the game and actually started playing with them, I noticed that the head of the household Zoi was listed as the father of the child, but their partner, the other queer Zoi that I made, was listed as a roommate. So I feel like that's something they need to fix. I heard Satch also talking about how like you can only be like husband and wife. You can't be like two husbands or something like that. It just says partner. Partner is like non-conforming, non-genderized term for your spouse. And it's something that's really common in the LGBTQIA Two-Spirit Plus community. I feel that there should be, you know, the ability to give a Zoi a female frame, but have a male gender or vice versa. Because, you know, trans people also exist. And they're here, and they're spending their money on this game and on this world that InZoi has created. And I feel like it would be in Crafton and InZoi Studios' best interest to, you know, appease the queer community. Perhaps if you're not a queer creator or you're not a queer player or what have you, none of that matters to you, and that's fine. I respect that. It doesn't have to be for everyone, but I do feel like it's in the best interest of the game developers to include these kinds of mechanics. And the reason for that is that queer people, generally speaking, are childless and have additional money to spend because they are childless. There are definitely queer people with families that have those expenses and stuff, but pink money talks. Pink money talks, and it's one of those things where with a life simulation, much like The Sims, a lot of the audience is a little bit more casual. They don't play as frequently, perhaps, or they might play super frequently, but this just happens to be their favorite genre. So I feel like it is in the best interest of the devs to make an effort to make these situations more commonplace, make them possible, you know? I would hope that before the game launches into like its full release, that I'm able to make a queerzoi who is able to go out and find a partner on their own without having to do it manually, and is able to then adopt a child or, you know, have perhaps a surrogate or something like that. Like, that would be such an interesting gameplay mechanic. Like, I personally am not much of a family gameplay person, but at the same time, I understand why there's a lot of family gameplay people. The whole point of a life simulation is to be able to kind of simulate different situations from what your current reality is, right? Maybe you want to have a husband with 6 kids and a crazy huge house and do all of that stuff. But maybe you just want to have your Zoi live in a modest house with their partner and they still want to have a kid. You should be able to do those things. And I think the interaction of, say, like using a surrogate, perhaps like a close friend Zoi, talk to them, you know, have an interaction where you can talk to them about potentially like having a baby for you and things like that, because these experiences are real. And to deny the player base the ability to make those choices kind of limits the life simulation of it all. You know what I mean? So it's just, those are my thoughts so far on the queerness in InZoi. I think that it's something that is important, and it's something that like the devs will likely get around to. But at the same time, I also, I give them some grace because we're just at early access launch. The roadmap says that they're going to let us adopt kids in the future. So who's to say that, something like surrogates or, trans folks being able to have children or vice versa not having children. I feel like those things would be benefits to the game overall, and it would allow for more freedom and creativity when it came to the stories that you can build. The game is beautiful. I do agree that perhaps it's a little bit soulless. I did, in my gameplay time, there wasn't a lot to do with my Zois that wasn't just like menial basic household tasks. The cleaning mechanic needs to be worked on. I'm sorry, my Zoi is the only person who lives in their tiny little apartment, and it's like dirty, like to the point of Psycat giving me a notification saying my house is dirty every day. And you know what? Don't get me wrong. There is, cleaning is something that needs to be done on a regular basis. I feel like they should slow it down a little bit, because I would vacuum and then within 20 minutes, my Zoi's living room would be deteriorating and things like that. Another feature I noticed that I don't know if it's really been talked about that much. I thought that my furniture was just getting dirty and then I would clean it, but it still looked dirty. So I zoomed in, and you can actually see there's like wear and tear on the furniture items. Like, I had a set of armchairs in my Zoi's living room that they never used. They never would sit in them. They would only ever sit on the couch. And so, they're not really using the chairs that much, and they were constantly getting dirty, and I couldn't figure out why. And then eventually, after them getting dirty enough times, I noticed that like the material on the chairs had wearing on it and looked like it was like an old piece of furniture that somebody hadn't taken care of very well. And I feel like this might be like a hidden mechanic to kind of encourage players to go into the build mode and replace those objects over time, which is really, really clever in my opinion, because with The Sims, you build your house, you furnish it the way you want to, and maybe you forget an item here or there. So over time, through playing, you might add something here and there, maybe a new room, what have you. But once you put that furniture in the house, it's just there. It's functional. Sometimes it breaks down if it's an electronic or an appliance, but aside from that, it's just there, and it's good. You got it. This chair is here for you. You can sit in it any time. It's the same. With InZoi, it seems like the furniture actually takes that wear and tear, and so you would naturally have to go into build mode and eventually replace the objects that you have. I feel like it would really affect the financial system in the game, in the sense that like with The Sims, once you build your house and whatever, you can just accumulate wealth through working or through hobbies, various things like that. With InZoi, it seems like if you want your house to stay up to date and looking fresh, you need to replace those objects every once in a while. And I think that's a really interesting mechanic because that's something that happens in real life, but it's also something we've not really explored before in The Sims. So that's something that excites me. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about InZoi so far. I'm really looking forward to what is to come. But I think that, you know, identifying these few flaws that I've personally identified, and I'm sure many of you have as well, I feel like it's important. The game and the devs are, you know, out here. They've obviously worked really hard on this simulation. It's beautiful. And I think that the Sims fan base has been waiting an awful long time to kind of reach a level of realism, I guess you could say, that, at least graphically, that The Sims has kind of missed out on. They've skipped it. The Sims 3 was kind of that like alpha look. It had a little bit more of a realistic graphics engine to it, but it also still was very cartoony, for lack of a better word, stylized, I guess we could say. And so I feel like InZoi is tapping into a part of the market that has existed for a long time. People have wanted this for a long time, but EA just wasn't in a place where they could provide us with that. You know, maybe they didn't want to, maybe they weren't able to. You know, the whole controversy around cars in The Sims 4 still stands. And yeah, we get to have cars in InZoi, but in my experience, they're just like a side thing, right? I didn't enable manually driving because the driving mechanics are crap. And like, I'm not saying that to be a hater. The driving mechanics in InZoi are crap. It's giving like turning on a 45-degree angle no matter what. And that's not how a vehicle works, right? Like, we've got games like GTA, we've got games like Gran Turismo. These games have boiled down the simulation of vehicles so well that to compare anything else, any other mechanic, it feels half-baked, for lack of a better word. It feels like they heard the feedback that people wanted cars in The Sims, and that was really important to them. So they enabled it and they put it in there, but it needs to cook a little bit more. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's just my thoughts on InZoi Early Access so far. Like I said, I'm sure they're going to make many different changes. If you got to the end of this video, thank you. I appreciate it. Also, like, leave me a comment down below. Do you agree with what I've said? How do you feel about queer relationships in InZoi and the fact that there's no way to adopt a child? How do you feel about those things? And is it something that like breaks the game for you? Is it something that takes you out of it and like you can't get into the vibe simply because you're not able to represent either yourself or someone you know's life in a true kind of way? So yeah, leave a comment down below because I'm honestly curious. Also, for all of my Mac players, I will be releasing another video where I try out InZoi via crossover. I made a tutorial for the demo that they released last week, and I really appreciate the feedback you guys have left for me. It's been really nice to interact with other Mac, Sims, and InZoi players. And yeah, I would just love to kind of keep that train going. So I'm going to give InZoi another shot on crossover, and I'll make a video for you, but I'll be honest with you. I'm operating on an M1 Mac Mini with 16 gigabytes of RAM. Certainly not baseline by any means, but it is a couple of generations old, and I'm honestly hesitant that it will work. So I'll give it a shot. I know there's been a couple comments on the previous video I made where people with M4s or like the M3 Pros and things like that have had pretty good success on medium settings and that it's fairly smooth. So I don't think it's impossible, but I'm not so sure that my machine will be able to handle it. So keep an eye out for that video. Until then, thank you very much. If you've enjoyed hearing me talk, which, like, thanks, I guess, you can check me out on the Prima Donnas podcast. I'll link it in the description for you. My friend Imperium and I talk about scene, emo, pop music, and just that world and what's happening with festivals, what's happening with the controversies around certain bands, you know, the history, the culture, the lore of it all. if you're interested in that for the emo or scene music, or if it's for maybe the pop side of things, which is me, definitely check us out. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music. And we really love any sort of interaction. We're trying to grow ourselves to become kind of like a music publication in the future. So definitely check that out if you're interested in those music scenes at all. But until then, I will see you next time I do an InZoi video. Bye!